Well, look, we're looking to mix things up though in the podcast because one of the reasons we really wanted to have you on is that your 8 point brews are not the traditional thing which people think of 8 point. I almost thought we need to title this thing "I Can't Believe It's Not Blue Moon."
7 million.
7
7
Point Highlander. Alright, now we all have our drinks of water. Hello and welcome to 7 Point Cast. My name is Liam and I'm joined by my co-host Mouse.
I'm here and I'm offended that you think I would be just drinking water. It's Pepsi Max for life and no other beverage.
Oh look, I've got zero sugar pineapple flavoured soda water, so I think you might be losing this competition. But today we're joined by Chris, better known in the Discord as Mr. M01. Chris, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I will say definitely, doing this podcast is actually in many ways it's been a lesson in figuring out what people's actual names are. Every time Liam's like, "Oh, we're interviewing this person," and I see their Discord name in the chat, and then I learn that it's actually somebody I know, I then immediately have this internal panic of, have I been too rude to this person who I know is actually a top bloke in the Discord? Thinking, their moniker is this somebody else? I don't know if anyone else is having this experience.
I feel like after Chris panced us at Mana Clash, he might deserve some rudeness from you.
I mean, I punched Mouse, Liam.
Oh, well, look, Max DK pants me. You pantsed our team.
2-1, come on. Is that really a pantsing or is that just an honest game of MTG?
Look, I'll give Mouse some credit. The biggest pantsing in our 3-game match was the game to re-stormed me, so...
Yeah, it's true. It's really feast or famine these lands. If you draw the strip lines in the wastelands, they work a lot better. Alright, I've completely derailed Lime's intro. Sorry, Lime. Keep going.
Yeah, pretty rude. Look, Chris is an 8-point gamer from Canberra. Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you like about 7 Point Highlander and how you got into it?
Yeah, so the format it's a really interesting format to play. Obviously, we've got such a wide card pool, which really opens up a lot of interesting space for creativity and brewing. I got started in the format essentially because that was what was running at Jolt on Monday nights. I'd originally been going there for Monday Night Draft, and that kind of fell away, and I saw the group playing a format I didn't know about, and I saw the board states in play. I saw cards like Time Walk and Dual Lands, but also Queen Marchesa and a bunch of Pyromancers, and I was like, this format seems awesome. So I cobbled together a pretty average Abzen Hate Bears list and kind of grew out from there. And it's been a couple of years now in Highlander, and I think it's the best format around, that and Draft. So.
And after having seen all the Time Walks, how many Time Walk decks have you built?
I had built exactly 0 Time Walk decks.
Yeah. I had a very similar thought line when you're kind of setting the scene. On one side, I saw all of these really epic, expensive, old cards which do very powerful things. On the other side, I saw Queen Marchesa, and I thought, that's my side. I'm going to be an 8-point gamer.
Choice made. Well, look, that's a pretty good segue because we are talking about 8-point gaming today. Before we get into some of the decks that you've given us to show, why don't you tell us, number one, why is it that you've decided to be an 8-point gamer rather than playing with duels and other reserve list cards? And number two, how has that affected your deck building decisions?
Absolutely. So, firstly, I started in the format before we had the 8-point rule, so I was just an 8-point gamer playing 7 points before the committee added the accessibility rule, which I think has been really good for the format. I personally play 8 points because I don't really want to pay the amount of money that some of these really nice older cards cost for a Magic card. And while the community is really, really good about loaning a bunch of cards out, and I did borrow a fair bit for Mana Clash this year, there's certain expensive cards that I wouldn't feel comfortable borrowing. So I decided to pursue the 8-point life, and it's been really interesting. It does lead you to really think a little more deeply about your brew, especially where the mana base is concerned. I think that's the place where everyone kind of likes to have 7 point. They like their duels, and there are certain archetypes that it does kind of lock you out of being an 8 point rather than 7. So, like for instance, I can't really go and sleeve up Underlord Breach. I can't really go and sleeve up bots because you lose Academy, you lose Workshop. In Breach, you obviously lose Lion's Eye Diamond and all the duels that 4 or sometimes even 5 color deck would require. So it closes some doors, but also opens a lot of other ones. And that extra point, especially nowadays with modern card design, really does add a fair bit of power to the deck.
Mm. Can I ask actually? So, when you were saying about decks you're locked out of, the examples you gave are ones where there's like an explicit reserve list card, which is necessary to make like the combo function or the deck function. Are there any kind of like not necessarily card specific restrictions, but just broader mana based restrictions, which you feel lock you out of certain things, or is it kind of like, look, at the end of the day, the mana's are all good, or albeit a bit more painful. It's really just the cards which rule you out of certain things.
Certain archetypes, it is those particular cards, but in general, I find on 8 points, it's really hard to be more than 3 colors, and sometimes even more than 2.
Mm-hmm.
Like I find that you can push the mana base to be 3 colors, but for instance, if I wanted to build something along the lines of like a 4-color Omnath deck, like kind of like that Walkless Walks kind of list, there are considerations where if you are looking at a lot of double-pipped cards, it is quite hard to have access to all of those consistently without the dual lands as well as your shocks. So, and the life considerations of that as well. Fetch shock does hurt the second or third time you do it in a game. So,
I don't want to spoil some of the lists we have coming up, but it sounds like, given the life loss, you would be pushed into highly aggressive decks, so that you can compete on the life loss front.
Yeah, absolutely. So the decks that I've brewed in the past have been usually at maximum 3 colors to not do too much damage to myself on the shocking basis. I did brew 4-color Flash at 8 points, primarily because Flash is a strategy where you should be winning the game before the life loss hurts you too much. But that was definitely pushing the mana base a little bit, and it was really helped by a lot of single-pipped cards rather than double-pipped cards. But generally, I do find it does push you towards a more aggressive route. I think we've seen that with a lot of the 8-point lists that have done well recently. That the Legends list that Henry won the RC side event with. A lot of the RWX lists that top-aided the most recent Canberra event. I think it does lead you towards a more aggressive slant.
Well, look, we're looking to mix things up though in the podcast, because one of the reasons we really wanted to have you on is that your 8-point brews are not the traditional thing which people think of 8-point. I almost thought we need to title this thing "I Can't Believe It's Not Blue Moon," because we're not here to talk about just traditional red-white X, and we're not here to talk about traditional Blue Moon 8-point. You've got kind of two unique kind of 8-point brews to talk about, and we're interested in promoting those ideas and seeing if there are other voices in the community working in a similar space. So why don't you go ahead and introduce the first deck to us?
Absolutely. So this is my my Rug Sneak and Show list from CanCon 2024. It was run back at CanCon 2025 to a less good result. We won't talk about that. This is the first version of the deck, and this was a deck I'd kind of been looking for a little while, basically because I wanted to play Show and Tell, and I thought, how can I build around that? And then I figured, as I was iterating the deck, I thought moving into a kind of mid-range combo hybrid would give me a nice different angle of attack compared to a lot of what was in the format at the time. And it ran really smoothly for me, actually. I still really like the deck. It's currently in prison for a little bit after CanCon 2025, but we can discuss that later.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, well, can we maybe just, before we go in detail slide by slide, can I just have a quick flick through each so I can see around the land bases Kind of, I guess, what you'd expect with a rug deck, but we've got some shocks instead of jewels, and we've got the triume. Quite a few basics, including a basic mountain. I'd like to talk about that in a tick. What else is in this deck?
Look,
Just so we
I started with the lands because I thought it would be a funny joke about the most important part of an 8 point deck is what do I put in my deck apart from jewels, but it didn't really land, so just go to the creature suite.
didn't land. You're saying, like, oh my word, this is a triple entendre.
Yeah.
In here we have the creatures, so it looks like we've got a bunch of mana dorks. We've got Ragavan, some of those classic 2 drops in red, green, Morlock, Scavenging Ooze, and also we've got the land cyclers. We've got Fury and Endurance, and then your targets we've got for us sneaking in Atraxa, Atali, Archon, Woodfall Primus, Worldspine Worm, and Emrakul. That's quite a few, and Minskambu. And then what's our instant and sorcery suite looking like? So we've got the classic Ataxian Probe, Ponder Preordain. We've got Brainstorm there as well. We've got EI. We've got Natural Order as well. Okay, that makes the mana dorks make a bit more sense. We've got Natural Order, Show and Tell, and then I guess we've got kind of like the Blue Red All Stars: Spell Pierce, Lightning Bolt, Unholy Heat, Daze, Force of Will, Force of Negation, and then probably what people would expect in terms of like Through the Breach, Sneak Attack. We've also got some more fast mana: Chrome Mox, Lotus Petal, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, and some tutors in Worldly Tutor and Mystical Tutor. Well, Chris, what do you reckon is the first element of this deck to start with? Like, what kind of like informs your design?
So I guess if we did want to start at the mana base, going into that event, I was a little bit worried about the moon effects, and so I did want to give that a bit of respect. I also was conscious that I've been playing all 3 land cyclers, so I did want to have sufficient basics in the deck to make sure I had an untapped source off of the land cyclers if I needed it, and also this was during the high time of initiative. If we remember, Chifley won the event on initiative that day, so also having basics available when you take the initiative also is quite nice. Otherwise, the mana base is fairly standard for your 8 point list. You've got some fetches, some shocks, a couple of utility lands in Boseiju and Otawara, which did a lot of work at that event, and then Ancient Tomb for a little acceleration just to power up that sneak attack or show and tell that turn earlier.
Yeah. I do actually, I guess the 2 things which jump out at me about the mana base is one, yes, the Ancient Tomb, and it kind of is the same conversation as like Lotus Petal and Chrome Mox. I don't think it's super normal for me to, like, I'm just trying to think of decks I've seen in the past to see like Chrome Mox and Mana Dorks. I feel decks usually choose, like, they're either doing the kind of artifacty slash ramp slash land, so like Ancient Tomb, City of Traders, Mox Diamond, Chrome Mox, like it's either that package or it's the Mana Dorks package. What kind of, makes you think it's actually time to kind of unite the forces, so to speak, and have the Mana Dorks alongside the Ancient Tomb, Chrome Mox, and Lotus Petal?
So the thinking behind having essentially all of that acceleration in the deck was, I do just want to land a sneak or a show as quickly as possible, and the dorks are also a consideration for natural order, so they kind of play a bit of a dual role. The other thing is, you'll see a lot of the dorks there, they will tap for multiple colors of mana, so they're going to fix the mana situation for me, plus in certain situations I can actually hardcast some of the ones you wouldn't expect me to be able to. I hardcast multiple Atraxas with this deck, using a combination of birds, the laddered halfling, and the hierarchs. And then
Okay, yeah, cool.
yeah.
I really like as well, to be honest, because I think with the Sneak and Show package, like I've played a bit of it myself, and actually I think I did play like a Sneak and Show Oath deck at that CanCon which you brought this to. Is that there's a lot of colorless mana in the spells, like Show and Tell is like 2 colorless and a blue, Sneak Attack 3 colorless and a red, Through the Breach 4 colorless and a red. And in principle, if you ignore the mana cost, these cards are incredibly powerful. It's like Reanimator without the exposure to graveyard hate, and the need to play like discard spells. That they are points free. It's kind of like Flash, but not worth 3 points. That really the only downside is the high demand on the mana. And so it does kind of make sense to me why you'd be putting a premium on something like Ancient Tomb, which not isn't good for like these pip intensive combos like Reanimator, but for this it's perfect. Is that kind of like marrying along your thinking as well?
Absolutely. And when I laid out the deck and looked at the most important spells in the list, a lot of them, as you just said, didn't have a lot of pips on them. It was a lot of 2 and X, 3 and X, 4 and X for Through the Breach. So looking at the list, because I do have spare points in this list in terms of what's not allocated to the quote-unquote combo. So Ancient Tomb looked like a great place to put a point just to give me a bit of extra acceleration.
Yeah, and I'm thinking as well, to be honest. Like I'm thinking about the lines which this opens up, and you know, I probably should have put Ancient Tomb in my own list. Maybe I need to be less of a coward, but like I'm thinking like you could go turn one Green Source Mana Dork, turn two Ancient Tomb Natural Order, right? Because like the Mana Dork and the Green Source provide the two green, and the Ancient Tomb provides the two colorless. And I imagine that like yeah, similarly speaking, like a turn two Sneak Attack, although I guess don't think you could activate it, or perhaps even like a turn one show and tell, like Ancient Tomb plus Chrome Mox or Lotus Petal. Are these like kind of specific lines which are designed for, or are these kind of like happy accidents? Do they come up much? What have you got to say on that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely did cast multiple turn 2 show and tells off of this list. I ran pretty hot that day.
Mm-hmm.
And like show and tell's such a powerful card, and especially with some of the targets that you've seen in the other slide, a lot of those cards, there are answers to them in the format, but the earlier you can land them, just the lower resources your opponent has in play to actually deal with them. So I definitely found that the Tomb did help. And yeah, Tomb into natural order on turn 2 is disgusting. I don't think I've done that one yet, but I want to keep an eye out for it because that sounds really fun.
Yeah.
And did you find there was a tension with the shocks in the mana base and the Ancient Tomb, like shocking you every time you tapped it when you were playing this, take into account your consideration for life loss earlier?
Yeah, there was definitely consideration, and I do remember some games where I went pretty low on my life total. But as they say, life is a resource. A win on 1 means same as a win on 56. So I was ultimately it worked out for me quite well that day. But yeah, it is a valid consideration. Notably, this is before we got the Surveil lands printed, and they're a godsend for 8-point lists. They're so good to have access to. Between being another fetchable duel and the utility of a Surveil, I can't speak highly of them enough, and I think they really help the 8-point mana bases moving forward.
What would you cut for them in this list, or is this list going to put like a big premium on being quick, and maybe not, and maybe there'd be a liability?
So the updated version of the list, I've gone down a couple of basics and I've cut the Triome for the 3 Surveil lands because the card selection is so nice to have.
Mm-hmm.
One of the elements of being at least partially a combo deck is wanting to make sure you do get access to your key combo pieces. So having those Surveils to either not draw a land or see that you are going to draw the sneak or something is very valuable.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so there's a few things which jump out at me about this. First thing is the pointed choices. So Minskimbu and Ragavan. Minskimbu makes perfect sense to me. I can see that this is like an expensive card, but that's offset by all that fast mana we're talking about. It's expensive on points, but this is one of the beauties of the 8-point list is that they can afford a bit more of a splashy, high-impact threat like Minskimbu. And also, obviously, the ability to get it out potentially quickly, like on turn 2. That's where Minskimbu can take over a game just as well as Atraxa could, in theory. But Ragavan, you're gonna have to explain this one to me because traditionally in my head, Ragavan is like it's the Volcanic Island Ragavan Days backup card. Do you know what I mean? Like I kind of feel like it's a card which requires a lot of protection so it can win the game by itself. How does it fit in this list in your mind?
So Ragavan actually did a lot of work in this list for me. It does a lot of key things. So firstly, if my opponent opens on hand attack, say I'm on the draw rather than the play, if my opponent opens on hand attack and sees XXX, Show and Tell, and Ragavan, they might have to take the Ragavan if they don't have a way to deal with it.
Mm.
Ragavan tends to eat. A lot of white players will throw a swords at a Ragavan to not have it hit them, and swords is one of the only ways to answer a lot of my high end threats. Also, if the Ragavan does connect, I get access to treasure to further speed up the rest of the plan. I might get access to a nice card from their library, and then I get to play this other game where I am just using the Ragavan to consistently gain advantage or force bad decisions from my opponent. All the while, I'm just assembling cards in my hand to go over the top in the end game. So it's one of these cards that can really centralize a game if it's unanswered, and that's the kind of threat that I wanted in the spare point, the same way Minsk and Boo is.
Yeah.
It just comes down a little earlier. And also, even if my opponent goes, turn one blocker for the Ragavan, if I've got a hierarch, often I can punch through with the Exalted and force either a bad chump or my opponent doesn't want to block it, and then I get the effect anyway. So
Yeah, okay. One of the things I do really like, which makes a lot of sense to me in that answer, is that often these these kind of like mid-range combo hybrid decks, they get a lot of equity out of forcing your opponent to invest resources answering Plan A, so that Plan B goes through uninterrupted. And I suppose that's where Ragavan really does stick out as being, in all of the one drops which you can play in the format, you could probably ignore most of them for 3 or 4 turns, but you absolutely could not ignore Ragavan, right? Like the opponent needs to start making, as you said, like hand disruption choices, card selection choices, removal choices, which are going to disadvantage them in dealing with the plan B. And so, yeah, I actually really like that choice. Now that you've explained it like that. And I suppose does this kind of explain why, for example, a card like Ren and Six is not likely to be as good in in this deck, because like it's a nice card advantage engine, but it's not exactly like winning the game in 3 turns like Minsk or Ragavan is.
yeah, so when I assembled this list, I had like a core package of points that I wanted to allocate towards cards for the combo. So Mystical Tutor, Force of Will, Natural Order before that got depointed, and so I had a couple of spare points lying around, and I thought, okay, I need to allocate these into cards that are going to be a bit of a game plan on their own.
Mm.
And Ren and Six does a lot of good things. It deals with mana dorks, it deals with opposing Ragavans really well, but it is the kind of card that your opponent can just ignore if it's not really affecting them too much. I'm not recurring strip mines with it, so I wanted my points to be in something that the opponent can't ignore.
Yeah, yeah. No, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I think that design decision is really good. I noticed you've got Scavenging Ooze in the deck. Is the new one, the Keen-Eyed Curator, of interest to you, or is it like too mana pip intensive?
Oh no, Curator is in the updated version of the deck. I like that creature a lot more than Scavenging Ooze.
Right.
To be honest, Scavenging Ooze was the 60th card in this list. I was frantically messaging with Max Dekivith the night before CanCon, going, "Is this a Ledger Shredder? I don't know which one it should be." And then we were just talking, and I thought I wanted the extra main deck hate piece for graveyards. And it paid immediate dividends in round 1 at CanCon. I got to snag an early time walk out of my opponent's graveyard and won the game pretty handily from there. So
Yeah, well, I think, to be honest, a lot of these like mid-rangey lists really should. I mean, lots of them do. These kind of incidental graveyard hate cards actually are really powerful. Like obviously, black gets it so for free with Emperor of Bones and Douthie Voidwalker. But yeah, I think Scavenging Ooze and Endurance and the Keen-Eyed Curator are really excellent in green, because, as you said, there are so many like decks out there where the game is just very different. If you can nick that one card out of the graveyard, can shut down an entire line of attack.
absolutely, and yeah, and Scavenging Ooze did its job very well on the day. There are a lot of cards that just, if they sit in the graveyard, they threaten so much. They can threaten to be reanimated. Time Walk sitting in the graveyard threatens your opponent to just go off seemingly out of nowhere. So being able to snag those pieces, I think, is really important in the meta back then and still today.
And just to rewind for a moment, I don't know if we mentioned it yet, but at the time, Ragavan was 2 points, and now it's 1 point, so this deck would have access to an additional point. So all of your analysis before about Ragavan being a one-card game plan and forcing bad decisions for your opponents is now open to all 8-point lists in a much lower threshold than it used to be.
Absolutely, and the new version, I recooked this list recently, and the 8th points would now be Oko, which is now also a 1-point card. Thank you to the committee for that one. And again, Oko is another one of these threats that can just kind of take over the game on its own, and requires a lot of resources from your opponent to answer it. So it's the perfect card to slot into this.
I'm actually looking as well because I was thinking to myself at the mid-range creature package, there are very few blue creatures, but I suppose that the answer to that is probably that you need natural order targets, right? And we've kind of only got, what is it, 4, 5, 6, 7. Have you found yourself feeling like starved for a natural order target, or is it usually easy enough to get one of them out?
To be honest, no, I haven't really felt an issue with finding a natural order target. Between Atraxa, Woodfall Primus, usually the primary two, but every now and then as well, Spine Worm. Some decks just can't deal with the 15/15 that dies into 3 more 5/5s.
Yeah, so I think I asked the wrong question. I meant like having a green creature to sack to natural order.
Oh, no, not often, and that's why there's the 4 mana dorks in the deck. And also, I'm also very happy to sacrifice a Morlock or a Scavenging Ooze for a natural order. The Morlock usually done its job by then. It's usually eaten their mana dork or whatever it's been in to fight, and then it's just kind of sitting there, getting a bit of damage in. But if I could turn it into an Atraxa, I'll happily do so.
Is there any consideration for cards like Ice Fang Codal or Coiling Oracle? Like these kind of cards where they, like cantrips, so they kind of nominally advance the the finding the combo game plan, but also double as natural order targets.
I think they're a little bit small ball. I have been toying with Dryad Arbor as a way to sneak a green creature into play off of a fetch land. So that would probably be the extra one if I was going to go for another one.
And I imagine that pairs with Green Sun Zenith as well.
It could do. I haven't found room in the list for it. The list is actually quite tight when it comes to cards.
Okay. And with the land cyclers, how are these like are these often there to be cast? Like, what's the purpose of having them in the list?
So they're in there for a few reasons actually. So they can be hard cast, especially with all the mana dorks and the fast mana. It's not that hard to get to 6 to hard cast them.
Yep.
They're actually pretty reasonable. Especially Olafaunt's a pretty reasonable sneak target. If I've got something else in play, that's a lot of sudden power and trample on the board.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and I remember one match at a Cambrawl, I was playing against a very interesting Mardu Burn list and just went for an early show and tell for Generosent and figured a 5/7 that brings me a food is good enough, and it was good enough. So, and also the Land Cyclers are there again for mana considerations. And just, as a couple of extra creatures for casting and showing if absolutely necessary.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The last thing I want to ask on this slide is about the targets. So you've got Atraxa, Atali, Archon of Cruelty, Woodfall Primus, World Spineworm, and Emrakul. I guess the two things I would ask is one, is 6 the right number? And then the second thing I ask is why these 6? I think no one's going to argue with Archon, Atraxa, Emrakul. These are kind of the premium 3. But maybe more interesting would be to learn what are your thoughts around Atali, Woodfall Primus, and World's Bloodworm.
Yeah. Full disclosure, Atali has since been cut.
Oh no.
Sorry, Atali. But yeah, Atali's been cut. I wanted to also cutting a red target was nice to lessen my exposure to blue blasts.
Yep.
So I won't spend too much time on Atali. But Woodfall Primus and Worldspine Worm are both really nice kind of intersections of all the ways I can cheat creatures into play because they're both natural. They're both natural orderable. They're both quite good to sneak in, and they're both quite good to through the breach in.
And that's because of the Guy's effect, right? As opposed to Atraxa, where it's just draw a bunch of cards, gain 7 life.
Exactly. Yeah. So through the breach, Worldspine Worm is firstly there's the 15 immediate damage that they've got to deal with. And and then there's another 15 spread across 3 bodies after that.
Yeah.
So I found those were the best creatures to kind of take advantage of all the ways I can cheat creatures into play with this list. And obviously, Emrakul, Atraxa, and Archon are outstanding and don't require much explanation.
Is there any consideration to? I'm trying to remember what the card is. It called Vaultborn Tyrant, the kind of like newish one. I think it's like the 6/6, like an ETBs. You gain through life, you draw a card, and then when it dies, you make a token copy of it. So you get to like gain through life and draw another card. Is this card on your radar at all?
Yeah, Vaultborn Tyrant is something I was considering. I played it at CanCon this year. I didn't see it once, so I don't have any data on it. From having played with it in limited and cube formats, the card's incredible. So I assume it would probably be pretty good. But no, I haven't seen it on the battlefield yet, so I can't really report much on it.
Oh, that's all right. I suppose the last thing I was asking is like how often is just like casting these cards a thing? But I remember when I played some Sneak and Show Atali, one of the things which I found like kind of weird about it, but also kind of good, is that sometimes you just cast it. Like 7 is not insurmountable. Like how valuable in your mind is the castability of these cards?
Yeah, so all of them, bar Worldspine and Emrakul, really are theoretically castable with the lands and the mana dorks in the list.
Mm-hmm.
I have hardcast all of them, again, bar those two, bar Worldspine and Emrakul. They're a little bit too big. But yeah, being able to hardcast the threats also makes a big difference. Especially in those kind of stalled out games where both players are top decking and you've got some dorks sitting there not really doing anything. Being able to hardcast one of the big targets can really swing the game. So
that's where they're like
also a consideration.
It's where like the goblin token off Fable the Mirror Breaker becomes like the torch bearing suicidal hero as he like goes in to get the last treasure and then boom, Archon cruelty out of nowhere.
I have definitely done that one. Yep.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the next slide. I'm very keen to hear about this. So there's actually quite a lot going on this, because this slide looks so different to the previous one. You know what I mean? Like it almost looks like they're going in totally different decks. I guess the first question is like, can you really build a combo deck like this without the blue card selection? Is this kind of just like a necessary part of it?
So I think the blue card selection is really important for a list like this. Whether you're doing the mid-range side of the deck or whether you are going for the faster combo element, having the blue card draw interaction card selection is really valuable. And the counter magic as well kind of plays a role across both halves of the deck. A Force of Will is just as good at protecting an Archon as it is a Minsk and Boo, and both cards can equally end the game pretty quickly. And otherwise the rest of the we've already discussed the fast mana. Sneak Attack is obviously core to the gameplay of the deck, and Fable the Mirror Breaker is just a messed up card, and happy to pay a point for it in basically any red deck at the moment, and it just does so much work between the mana generation off the treasure, the looting effect, and then cloning something like a Fury is always just incredible.
Yeah, I found when I play this that Fable, especially if you get it off fast mana, like that Fable with any turn early, even if like a Lotus Petal turn 2, is so much better on turn 3. Like the Goblin is so much more likely to get in more than once. You get to that stage 3 of the saga very quickly. But also when like you're running stuff like Show and Tell, if you put like Archon into play, immediately making a copy out of it, like that kind of extra trigger, pseudo haste, is like a super real part. Like, have you had those kind of similar play patterns before as well?
I don't think I've copied Archon. I think I've copied Woodfall Primus, and that was similarly disgusting. I got to do multiple Stone Rains off of those triggers, and it was great.
Yeah, out of interest though, like just a few kind of cards which I think major people might be interested in knowing about. So, Expressive Iteration. Do you have any? Are there any kind of like timing restrictions around this card which are awkward? Like obviously seeing like a fatty off EI has got to be a bit weird, or like seeing a card like Through the Breach where it's like I can't really cast this now. Like, have you found that card to be awkward at all?
There are configurations of 3 cards in the deck that can be a little bit awkward. It's not quite as free as it is in some of the other decks, where you'll almost always get a nice clean set of 3. But EI is such a nice card for the list in kind of smoothing out your pathway between the mid range and the combo plan. It also pitches to Force and to Fury if required. And the fact that EI was on the watch list, I think, just shows the power level of the card, and I'm kind of happy to take any slight awkwardness for that extra bump in power.
Yeah, fair enough. And I suppose as well, actually, I get this isn't like a super common play pattern, but when you're playing like Mana Dorks and EI, there's the nice thing where like you go Mana Dork on turn 1, and then on turn 2 you cast the EI off the land and the Mana Dork so that you can get your second land drop off EI, which is not super normal, right? Usually people are kind of like holding this card until turn 3. Is that like a relevant play pattern that you play for? Or?
It hasn't come up a lot, but it's definitely something I would be quite interested in doing. It's a nice, EI is just an incredible card. I'll cast it any way I can, really. It's just really, really good.
Yeah. With the Force of Negation, is this mainly like a defensive counterspell, or is this for like you want to do the trick where you threw the breach at the end of their turn and back it up with your Force of Negation, like, or is it just kind of like, look, it just is what it needs to be at the time?
It's a little bit of both. So it definitely is good for that opponent's end step through the breach play pattern. I've done that a few times. But also, it's just the kind of card where, especially because this campaign we still had Reanimated 0, Fourth Eolingus, I believe, was still 0 at that point. So it was definitely a bit of a meta call to say that there's a lot of strong sorcery speed cards going on from my opponent, and I want to have a way of dealing with that.
Yeah, that makes 100% sense. Yeah. I suppose as well, the initiative forcing Mana Crypt would have been a pretty like relevant contextual play. Hey.
I would love to have done that. I didn't get to do it, but yeah, it was definitely a valid consideration.
You always do it the next time, though.
Yeah.
Force Negation's always on top of your library when they cast Mana Crypt.
I've definitely drawn Mental Misstep the turn after my opponent plays a Soul Ring multiple times, and it's really fun.
Yeah. Out of interest, with are there any kind of like new cards which would be added to this list? Like obviously we kind of already spoke about Oko has been like a potential pointing opening up. What like I might think maybe Galvanic Discharge might go over Unholy Heat. Like are there any are there any new printings where you're like, oh, this should really be in the deck now?
So some of the newer cards that are in the deck at the moment are Fear of Missing Out. The body is quite nice. The extra combat step is quite nice, and the card selection from the loot from the Rummage effect on Fear of Missing Out, that's made the list. Not a lot of new instants and sorceries have made the list, mainly because of the power level of the existing ones.
Yep.
It's really hard to kind of find a spot for those newer cards. Unholy Heat, I still... Sorry, Liam? Yeah.
I was going to say, Unable to Scream. Did that make it in?
Have not considered it, to be honest. I do quite like Swords to Toy Shares.
I've never Twitter Swords to Toy Shares. I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to say. Hey, like cards like Unable to Scream, like slow the game down cards. Like I don't know if that's what this list kind of wants. Hey, it's like you just almost just want the very best removal you've on offer, and then do your thing.
Well, that's,
but it's got
that's kind of why I was thinking it, because Unholy Heat seems pretty unimpressive in this list. It's not like you're playing Darcy or Baubles or anything to meaningfully accelerate your graveyard. Like a non-trivial amount of the time on critical turns, Unholy Heat is going to be shock and not deal 6 damage.
Yeah, I hadn't really found Heat to be a problem. I found that if I was casting it early, shock was generally good enough, and given that Delirium's actually a fair bit easier to achieve than I think a lot of people give it credit for. Land creature instant sorcery. I'm playing a lot of Mana Dorks. They tend to attack removal, the fetch lands, a cantrip, and then any other instant, and I'm there. So
yeah. I feel as well this list runs both pitch elementals and also the land cycling creatures and Lore Revealed. So yeah, I can imagine that the graveyard would get Delirious pretty quickly.
Yeah, I've never had too much problem turning on Heat in this list.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, look, this has been really interesting. It's a really interesting like take on the sneaky show archetype. In particular, the putting it in the combo mid range as opposed to straight combo, and taking advantage of all the fast mana and stuff. And I like the more I like kind of look at these cards, I can see that there's a lot of like kind of cool play patterns which aren't obvious. You know, like having things like a Morlock, which is a little bit bigger ahead of schedule, or having Minskambu down, you know, just that turn earlier, having the turn one Fable, like the you know, having these cards like Ancient Tomb and Chromox where you wouldn't normally see them, I imagine creates a lot of really like interesting and dynamic play patterns which can really take the opponent by surprise. And as you said, it kind of means that they haven't got as much time to set up and find the answers. So yeah, this is really cool. I'd like to put a deck like this together and see how it goes.
Yeah, this deck is a blast to play. And being an 8 point list, and also not a lot of the cards in there are super expensive. If anyone wanted to try this out, the Chrome Mox is not essential. The Tomb is not even essential. So it's definitely a deck that is on like the more budget friendly side of decks as far as Highlander goes. Obviously, nothing's truly budget in this format, but it's definitely closer to it than some of the other lists we see running around.
Yeah, cool. All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to the next list, which is Eldrazi. So, maybe not a deck which people would traditionally associate with 8 points, but I'm really keen to see the take on it. Let's get a bit of an overview of what cards. Do you maybe, what Chris, want to walk us through the cards in each slide this time?
Absolutely, I'd love to. So, firstly, here, I guess I'll start on the Planeswalkers. This is essentially a who's who of some of the best colorless cards that have been printed in the last few years. Khan the Great Creator is obviously just an incredible card, and most of the sideboard is a Khan board. Khan is also just incidentally amazing against certain decks, especially in game one when they're not expecting it. You can just shut down a whole bunch of strategies just by landing a Khan. Ugin the Ineffable, the static ability is often relevant in helping to bring down the cost of some of the large Eldrazi monsters. And even then just vomiting out 2/2s every turn is a nice way to build some more Khan advantage. And then obviously the two Ugins there. New Ugin is just an incredible Magic card. The cast trigger is not necessary. It was not necessary. I'm grateful for it. I'll take the gift, but yeah, the card is really good.
I remember when this card was printed, I was just thinking to myself, they could have deleted literally any of these lines of text, and I would still be gawking at this card like it was too good. I don't know what they were thinking, other than just like that seven's a lot of mana, and maybe this is what people need to do nowadays. But like, if the old Ugin cost 7, it would still be worse than new Ugin, I think. I guess maybe the sweeping effect, but yeah, it's a silly card.
It's really, really good. I do maintain my position that New Ugin is a little bit better in bots than Eldrazi, because bots is playing a lot of smaller colorless spells. They can go, New Ugin, Bauble, Jeweled Amulet or something, and exile 3 things. But this card is still nuts. It's incredible. If you're in any kind of colorless deck, put this card in. You won't regret it.
Can I ask just quickly on these sets of planeswalkers? One of the things which I've often found, I guess, difficult when I've looked at bots and Eldrazi lists is that not all of the lands, but some of them quite I guess creature specific. Like bots, the workshop only works on artifacts, and in Eldrazi, like you get Eldrazi Temple and Eye of Ugin, but these obviously again only work on Eldrazi. Is that relevant, like in terms of like the castability of these planeswalkers? Like, because obviously there are going to be, like, I imagine a significant amount of mana-based configurations that would happily cast a 7-drop Eldrazi, but just won't cast Ugin. Have you found that to be a problem or not?
It comes up every now and then, but I tend to find in this deck you usually have, a couple of options here and there as to which large spell you'd like to cast. So I tend to find if you've got those kind of Eye of Ugin, Eldrazi Temple hands, you'll just cast the large Eldrazi first, and then that'll buy you a couple of turns to then find further mana to cast the Planeswalker, and then that will really close the door on the game.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. And I suppose like
Mm.
you could probably start walking us through some of these creatures. One of the things I really like about these Eldrazi lists is the creatures that also ramp. So yeah, like the Kozilek's Channeler, the Conduit of Ruin, the Eldrazi Repurposer, the Microspawn. I do like it's kind of like, one set of fast mana unlocks the creatures which become their own set of fast mana, which unlocks like the next thing, so to speak.
Yeah, sowing Microspawn was an all-star for me every single time I cast it. So we'll see it later on when we get to the lands, but there's a lot of utility lands in this list, and there's
Mhm.
also a lot of lands that tie in with other lands. Case in point, Planar Nexus, our newly pointed land. Uh, and so Microspawn, just being able to tutor in any of those lands untapped, was just excellent in opening up either double spell turns or uh, cast Microspawn, find a land, and then be able to hold up interaction in my opponent's turn. Yeah, so Microspawn was excellent. Glaring Fleshraker, I can't sing that card's praises enough either. Um, that the damage from all the Scions entering just gives you another alternate win condition. Uh, if you get enough mana, you can just essentially use some of these spells as burn spells and kill your opponent with a Fleshraker. Um,
Can I ask actually? So feel like with a lot of these Eldrazi lists, they kind of have this core set of like obviously awesome Eldrazi which everyone plays, but often the hardest decisions are on like the last two or three. In your mind, what are like the most marginal Eldrazi which did make the cut for you, versus like what are the ones which just missed out?
yeah, so there's a couple that I didn't quite get to play. Oblivion Sower, the 6 mana 5/8, I believe, that
Yep.
enters and uh, nicks your opponent's lands from exile. That one was quite tempting to put into the list as I guess a kind of easy other way to ramp. Um, I was also quite tempted by Territory Color and probably would have played it. Except I just couldn't find one. It's a random uncommon from MH3, uh, most relevantly with the keyword Reach, because there's
Right.
not a lot of flying or reach in this list, and Murktide Region is still a hell of a card.
Right, so let's talk about these two for a moment. So, because Oblivion Sower, I've played against a fair bit of Eldrazi, and one of the awkward things I found about it, because on paper it looks like exactly what you want, right? It's a 6 mana creature, so your first kind of round of ramp, your first Grim Monolith. Oh, not an 8 point. Your first mana vault. We'll get you
Yeah,
there. And then it finds the lands. But one of the things I found really awkward about it is that there are so many fetch lands in the format that you're kind of like like almost 50-50 to just happen to get a fetch land which can fetch nothing. Have you found that to be an issue with this card for consistency, or is it ultimately a 6 mana 5/8 like good enough?
I've definitely noticed that happen. I've had times where I've cast an Oblivion Sower, exiled 3 lands from my opponent's library, but it's Scalding Time, Polluted Delta, Flooded Strand, and I have no islands in my deck. I can't find anything with them unless I've got Yavimaya in play. They're just sitting there looking pretty. So that was definitely a reason why Oblivion Sower fell off the list as we headed into CanCon. Uh,
Yeah.
Conduit of Ruin, I've so nearly cut so many times, um, but Conduit of Ruin, I think, is actually sneakily quite important for the list because it gives you. Firstly, the cast trigger finds you your next really big scary threat, and then also the static cost reduction on the first creature you cast each turn means you should be able to cast that quite scary monster you put on top of your library. So I think it actually is more important than I originally gave it credit for.
Out of interest, when you cast the Conduit of Ruins, this is a decision point. I've always wondered what the Eldrazi players think. Are you just getting the card which is castable with your mana plus the Conduit discount, or is there like a consideration to be like, I know this thing's going to get removed, so I'm actually going to get something which I can cast anyway?
Also, Conduit of Ruin requires you to get something 7 or higher, so it's only getting Devour of Destiny up. Um,
I guess the real question I'm asking is like,
yeah,
do you get an old drifter thinking, imagine that you've got exactly 6 mana in front of you, so you know that like for if the conduit, and you know that you're not top decking another land because you're putting a creature on top. Do you kind of look at your opponent and go, this thing's going to suck up removal, I'm just going to get an old drifter? If I get it, great. If I don't, I can just draw cards. Or is it pretty much always I'm just getting the highest quality 7 or 8 drop available to me, and I'm running it out.
It's usually the latter. To be honest, my most common Condover target is Sire of Seven Deaths.
Yeah,
That card is unreal. I don't know. I know they gave it 7 keywords to be really cute with the whole 7 theme,
yeah.
but that's a lot of
Excuse
keywords
me,
on
people
only
being
7
cute
mana.
with the number 7. That's I wouldn't
Yeah.
trust anyone who does that.
Yeah. I think I was like, whose line gonna burn there? Oh wait, it's us. I gotta say that I respect that they've actually committed to the bit, right? Because it could have been worse. It could have been we had Grizzlebrand again, where everything was 7 except the mana cost was 8. The real meta joke would have been Sire of the Seven Deaths, but the mana cost was like 4, and then 4 of the colorless symbol. That I think that would have been the perfect. Only those who know Easter egg.
Oh, that would have been quite sneaky on their part. But
Can I
yeah,
ask Can I ask about the territorial color ideas? This is like 4 and green for a 7/5. It's got reach. But it has this landfall. Look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature, reveal it, put it into your hand. Oh, but you can also put it into your graveyard. Is this like landfall thing relevant at all? Like you're not running fetch lands, or is it literally just to have like a giant reaching guy?
So primarily it's to be a giant reaching guy. 7/5 for a 5 drop is huge.
Hmm.
Plus you get reach. But also in these kind of ramp decks, having any extra source of card draw or selection is really nice because you can end up in situations where you've got 10, 11 mana worth of lands in play, but just not much to do with it. And we'll see later on, there are some considerations as to how to address that. But the landfall ability on color is not nothing.
Yeah, fair enough. The only other type of card which I'm interested in is like the OG Eldrazi cards. Some of these like Kozilek's Predator or Nest Invader. Like I know they're not devoid, but they are Eldrazi. They come in, they make some spawns. Is there any consideration to these types of cards, or are they simply been outclassed?
I think they've been outclassed, to be honest. I think we've got some of the best in show Eldrazi on the screen at the moment. We've got 13 mana Emrakul, we've got 10 mana Ulamog, which just the cast Ulamog exile 2 things before the 10 even hits the board is just nuts. And then you've got, I guess, the rest of them are 7s to be more easily castable. Worldbreaker, Spawnbear Protector, Sire, and then Null Drifter, Drowner, and Devourer. I think that's really the nice tight package of the really expensive Eldrazi.
Yeah, cool. All right, let's send us to the next page. I really like the Path of Annihilation. This thing is I think it was underrated for a little while, but it really does do everything you want it to do. Hey.
Yeah, Path of Annihilation looks like a kind of derpy uncommon that just doesn't seem to really do anything, but it does kind of tie the whole room together by making you 2 spawn, by letting your spawn tap for mana. So you can either just use them as dorks, or you can go tap for mana, sack for diamond mana. The life gain on casting B Eldrazi is again not nothing, because you can kind of get a little low against an aggro deck before you land a big monster. So going Path into big monster gain 4 life, you're usually stable at that point. And then if you look at the rest of the slide, the instants and artifacts, the instants, I think.
Can I quickly ask just on the life gain? Is there any consideration for? I think it's called Breaker of Creation. It's like the 8 drop, which when it ETBs or sorry, when you cast it, you gain 1 life for each colorless permanent. So that's like including all of your lands. Does that guy get a sideboard slot or anything, or is he simply too expensive?
He was definitely one in the maybe board. I do like that text. I also like the hexproof and monocolored on there, and the Annihilator too. Ultimately, I decided against it mainly for the 4 toughness on it. I think it's a little weak on the toughness side for an 8 drop. So
yeah, so it's like been dismemberable where basically anything else wouldn't be. Because I'm trying to think Flame Slash is not that common a removal spell to be played. So it's like dismember, or is it just putting 2 burn spells together? Like what's the kind of 4 damage dealing spell which we're concerned about?
I don't even think it's necessarily a damage dealing spell. It's even just if I'm attacking with it, it's much more easily blockable than the rest of them.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you were telling us about the instance where you're really kind of taking advantage of all of the, quote unquote, colorless interaction available. Hey.
Yeah, there's some lovely colorless spells here. 7 Point Highlander All Star Mental Misstep once again makes an appearance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still don't know where I stand on the point misstep debate, but while the card is 0 points, I will continue to put it in basically every deck, and especially while busted one drops are in the format like Fastbond and Ragavan and Soul Ring, I will continue to happily play my misstep and
The real
enjoy
debate
snagging
If
them.
that's not the most roaring endorsement of the position that we should point mental misstep, I don't know what is.
Liam Mike was 100% when we were starting the pod. He's like, right, so we've got to make sure that at least 5 minutes of every episode is dedicated to like spreading propaganda about pointing mental misstep. Let's, please. But I do like how, like, honestly, the choice of mental misstep in deck construction has moved beyond should you play mental misstep or not into should mental misstep be your 60th card or 61st card. You know what I mean? Like it's when. Do you keep your decks to 60 and just like kick something out for mental misstep, or is it the cheeky 61?
I'm not Jordan McGilvray, so I'll keep my decks at a nice 60, and but misstep is in the list.
Hell yes. All right.
Yeah.
Some of these instances are, of course, like absolutely stock standard. No one's going to be surprised to see like Kozilek's Command, Dismember, Mystic Confluence. Sorry, Eldrazi Confluence. Warping Whale, though, I know doesn't always make the cut. Tell us why you think that it rates it in these 8-point lists.
Right, Warping Whale. This was a late addition to the deck, and this is where I've got to give a shout out to some of the other Eldrazi players, especially Ben from down in Melbourne, Ben T in the Discord. One of the people who definitely pushed the deck, ahead of this tournament. He was quite big on Warping Whale, and once I actually looked at the card properly, I completely understood why. It does a lot of the nice things you want early, and especially heading into this event where Ragavan had just gone down to 1 point, the exile target creature with power toughness 1 or less was really relevant. Warping Whale snagged multiple Ragavans and Tamios for me across the event the entire time. I don't think I used the Make a 1/1 Scion mode, but the other two modes actually saw a fair bit of play, and this card is just nice in these ramp decks because you don't get a lot of early interaction, so being able to even just put a little speed bump in your opponent's way to give you the time to build up some more mana and resources to then just go way over the top. Warping Whale is really impressive.
Is there any consideration for spatial contortion? So this is like the other 2-mana color spell, which is +3/-3 to a creature.
Yeah, Contortion is in the sideboard and did come in against basically any of the creature decks. But as far as the main board card goes, I like the flexibility of Warping Whale, but Contortion came in a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Out of interest with the counter sorcery spell, are you ever like pointing that at something like a Ponder or like an expressive iteration, or is this really saved for like your kind of big flashy ones like Natural Order? Like I guess what I'm asking is like when you've got Warping Whale, do you just point it to at anything which moves, or do you find that this is a card worth hanging on to for a crucial moment?
It's fairly context dependent. If my opponent was very low on resources and then found, say, something like an EI, I'd probably fling a Warping Whale at it. But otherwise, I tend to use it actually fairly early to deal with those early threats, like a Ragavan or a Tamiyo. Those kind of cards that, yeah.
Do you bolt the bird with it? Like if you're on the play, do you go after their Bird's Paradise?
It didn't come up, but especially if I know my opponent is going to be really needing those mantles, so I definitely give it a good consideration, especially if looking at the shape of my hand, that extra turn will be all the difference for me. So yeah, it's definitely something that could happen.
Yeah, sweet. In the artifacts, there are lots of ones which no one's going to be surprised to see. Your Expedition Mana Vault Soul Ring, Forsaken Monument, but the two which I kind of want to get a bit more information on. So one is the One Ring, which I imagine this is kind of one of the benefits to playing 8 points, right? That you get to play a card like this. Is this like your 8th point, or is this something you think that all Eldrazi players should just auto put in?
Yeah, so the One Ring is I guess the 8th point. It's the point I added, or I suppose got to keep once Plan 9 Nexus went to 1.
Mhm.
But yeah, the One Ring is obviously a very powerful magic card. Between the protection, between the extra draws, yeah, the One Ring is just great. And then Khan Silex is, I guess, just a bit of a concession to the quite aggressive decks that can give these ramp decks a bit of trouble. You know, if your opponent's gone 1-drop, 2-drop, maybe even 3-drop, and you drop a Silex, they're probably not going to extend onto the board any further, and even that just can help buy a little time.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the card styles is interesting because I feel like whenever it's played against me, and this is probably just contextually that like I'm a control player mostly. It feels like it's a like when it's played against me, it feels it's kind of like the back to basics type thing, right? Like it's like Mishra's Workshop, Khan Silex, chances are your hand doesn't work anymore. But you're saying that in your list because obviously you don't have that artifact specific ramp. It's kind of more like a pernicious deed, where it's like, here's my delayed wrath effect. Take a turn off, please, so that I can wipe your board and we'll start over. Do you reckon that's like fair to say that for you? Like it really is about this second mode, or is the stopping fetch lands and stuff like that a relevant part for you?
I'm definitely playing it probably about 85% for the wrath effect, 90%. The turning off fetch land, I guess it also turns off Force of Will and Phyrexian Mana, but yeah, that's a helpful bonus. It's definitely in here predominantly for the wrath.
Yeah, cool. All right, let's head over to the last slide then, which is the mana base. And while we look at this, can you just let us know what the points are then? So, because I can see Urza Saga and Ancient Tomb in the mana base. So yeah, what's the full suite of 8 points?
Yeah, so we've got Urza Saga, we've got Ancient Tomb being 2 of the points. We've got Soul Ring for another 3, and then we've also got Planar Nexus.
Yep.
And the One Ring to bring us up to the total of 8.
Yeah. Okay. Hang on. Is that 8? God, I'm failing to count. Urza Saga, Ancient Tomb, Planar Nexus, 3 points for Soul Ring, 1 point for
Mana Vault. Yeah.
And Mana Vault, right? Mana Vault on the One Ring. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then in terms of what are we losing for being 8 points then? It's like I guess these lists run like Candelabra. Oh, and they run City of Traders, I assume, right?
Yeah. So that was the interesting thing. So when I was looking at the Eldrazi lists that were running around, and were on 7 points, I was looking at the list and I saw the only actual reserve list cards in the 75 were City of Traders and Grim Monolith. So Grim Monolith is obviously something that does hurt a little bit to lose. It's another piece of ramp. City of Traders, I actually don't really mind losing in a deck like this, primarily because I find the most effective City of Traders use is in those more aggressive like initiative style decks when you can go like land 1, land 2, City of Traders, and then not play a land again for the next 6 turns and not care about that. Whereas in this deck, you do want to be hitting your land drops because you do have so much mana that you want to be spending. So while City can be a bit of a acceleration if you play it early, often you are going to have to lose it, and there can be a bit of a tension in certain hand configurations with City of Traders. So I wasn't too fussed about losing that, and then it became a consideration between do I want Grim Monolith or the One Ring, and I think that was a bit of a consideration, but I came down on the side of wanting the further card draw from the One Ring, and I mean, the deck went really nicely across the course of the Mana Clash weekend. I'm probably going to keep iterating this a little bit. I've got some thoughts on some new options, and
what are the new options? What are you thinking?
Yeah. So there's a couple of interesting sideboard pieces that a couple of the other Eldrazi players have been looking at. Firstly, I guess to help with the mirror and some of the decks with probably like permanents that are hard to deal with, and then some other interesting options for the more aggressive decks. So one of the interesting sideboard pieces for the aggressive decks, if everyone remembers All-Star Elephant Grass.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so Elephant Grass kind of like a ghostly prison type effect.
Exactly. But it comes down so early, and if you go, a couple of normal lands, but not the really expensive rampy lands, you can pay for a couple of turns of elephant grass and just preserve your life total until you get to the crucial mana points where you can let the elephant grass go, slam a big threat, and then your opponent's early creatures don't really matter.
Yeah, I can imagine like the play pattern of like turn one forest elephant grass, and then the rest of the game is just assembling Urzatron or something like that, where it really is just like make land drops.
Yeah, exactly. And just anything to buy you a little more time is really key in these decks,
Mm.
because if this deck gets to 7+ mana, I'm casting spells that are so much bigger and more impactful than a lot of the decks in the format of casting.
Yeah, like Side of the Seven Deaths will just
Yeah,
stabilize against aggro. Like it will block and gain 7 life. But yeah, there's a lot of good to be done there. Can I ask
exactly.
a couple of questions in some of these choices? The first thing I noticed is that you do actually have a reasonable amount of green, right?
Mm.
We've got Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, the coast. We've got Planar Nexus and Talon Gates can obviously filter into it in two forests. Are cards like Crop Rotation or Sylvan Scrying worth consideration? Like you've even got Bajuka Bog actually as like a potential crop rotation target. Or is spending like a turn to just find a specific land too slow? Or what's your thoughts on that?
I had considered Sylvan Scrying, but I think I'm okay using Expedition Map for that kind of effect.
Hmm.
Um, and also, like, scrying does require green, so if I'm gonna have that kind of effect in the list, I do want it to be colorless. And then crop rotation is still correctly a point, so I don't want to use one of my points on crop rotation. And again, that does require green, and it does take me down a land. Even if I sack a land and get one of the soul lands, I'm not net gaining as much.
Hmm.
So
Cool. Okay. And the next
yeah.
question I had was, with the loss of Grim Monolith, is there any consideration for like Basalt Monolith as one of those kind of like I just zoom up to a take over the game card next turn?
Yeah, that was definitely in consideration. Me and the testing team, heading into Mana Clash, were looking at Basalt Monolith as to whether that should be in the deck. And I probably would have played one. I just didn't have access to one. I had access to all these other cards, but I didn't have a Basalt Monolith.
Yeah. Sweet.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, look. Have you got any other like saucy ideas coming up for modifying this deck, or have we covered the next big ticket items?
I think that's the main ones for the moment. This deck is a hell of a lot of fun to play, uh, and there's a couple of interactions in the deck that came up much more often than I thought they would going into the Mana Clash weekend, and I was just really impressed with how smooth the deck ran. The enter the battlefield effect of Talon Gates of Madra phasing out an opponent's creature, getting to do that at instant speed either from the land's own ability or from Urza's Cave, that came up multiple times and was incredible every time it happened.
Yeah, I can imagine that's
Yeah.
like definitely the trick out of nowhere. Wait, does
Mm.
Earth Cave put the land into play? Oh, puts it
Yeah.
into play, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So also cracking that for Bajuka Bog, excellent move.
Yeah, okay. Look, the Bajuka Bug makes a lot more sense now that I know that the Urza's Cave provides the instant speed trick. Do me a favor one time. Can you please put up the Beanstalk into the deck? I want to know if the up the Beanstalk Eldrazi, well, obviously just for the visual comedy of like a bunch of spaghetti monsters climbing up the Beanstalk. I swear it has to be good. Surely in a deck with this many 5+ things, it's got to do some work.
It may very well be good enough. The fact that it replaces itself on entry, which is the bugbear of my existence, and whenever I hop on the arena ladder and run into the domain decks. But Up the Beanstalk is still a really powerful card, so it's worth a test.
Hell yes. All right, well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us here, mate. It's been really cool to see. I was really enthusiastic about like an 8 point gaming session that wasn't just talking about Blue Moon without Volcanic Island. And these decks have been really creative and interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, 8 Point Gaming opens up some new windows, as I said before, and like this format is such a deep format, and so much of it is unexplored because while it's a really popular format among our community, it's still not that big compared to the wider Magic community. So there's a lot of unexplored space in the format. This is by no means its old format, and I guess I just encourage everyone to put your thinking caps on and really see what you can do.
Yeah, I mean, you've identified as a through line 3 unique ways to approach 8-point building. Either like you're the aggro deck and you're going under the opponent and you don't care about the life loss, or you're a combo deck and you don't care about the life loss because you're going over the opponent, or you're just building this deck that has basically no lands, like no shocks that actually hurt you, and so you're not losing out on not playing the duels. It's a really, really intelligent set of options to solve the 8-point problem.
And the one thing I would say about 8-point decks is, if you are going to build an 8-point space, don't just try and build essentially a worse version of a 7-point list. Like, it's a good starting point to maybe take a 7-point list, pop the duels, add some surveils or something else. But then I think you do want to have a little more consideration of what does the extra point and your slightly different mana base and your different game plan allow you to do a little bit differently. What kind of other angle can you attack the game from that a traditional 7-point deck may not get the chance to?
Yeah, and I suppose like in your first list, that would be like, I get to play the powerful pointed combo pieces, like with the tutors and the forces, but I also get to play Minsc and Ragavan. And in the second list, it's like the Eldrazi list and the fast mana list are already pinched on points because all the mana's pointed. So I just get to play the points and the card advantage engine in the One Ring. So it's like that kind of thinking, right? Like what is the edge the 8-point gives you?
Exactly, and it can actually give you a lot of extra game. I mean, I mentioned before that I played an 8-point flash list for a little bit, and obviously that deck wants to put all its points into flash and then tutors. But having the 8th point meant I got to play Force of Will as well, and that was a nice little gotcha for opponents who weren't expecting the Force of Will out of that deck, because all the points go into Profane Tutor and Flash and all the other tutors. So
yeah, true. I can imagine there'd be a lot of people tracking the plays and automatically discounting Force of Will, but suddenly, oh, there it is. Yeah, true. All right, Liam, do you have anything else to add in closing, man?
Look, well, we like to wrap up with a couple of quick questions. We were contractually obligated to ask about mental misstep, but you've already addressed that one for us, so I've got 3 different ones. So just try and answer these as quickly as possible. They're not super deep. The first one is, if money wasn't an issue, what would be the 7-point deck you would most like to play?
I think I'd play bots. It's similar to Eldrazi, but Mishra's Workshop is just such a powerful drug.
Cool. The second one is, what non-dual card do you wish was not a reserve list card for the purposes of building an 8-point deck?
Oh, taking out the duels. I'm actually going to say Lion's Eye Diamond. I think that card opens up so many different archetypes. And there's not really a fair Lion's Eye Diamond played, so it'd be fun to do some more unfair things.
Yeah, like 8-point Storm, 8-point Breach. Yeah, cool. That's a good answer.
And finally, as an 8-point gamer, what card would you most specifically like to see pointed or depointed insofar as it affects 8-point decks?
Oh, that one's a little bit harder. I was always a long campaigner that the 3rd point on white.
Sorry, I completely spoke over you then. I was just thinking to myself, it is a difficult question. It's like, what is the single point that will change the meta for this subset of decks?
Yeah, I was always a campaigner that the 3rd point on White Plume in that big point update should have gone to City of Traders. But White Plume Adventurer is still an incredibly powerful card, so I'm not sure if that's really the correct point to go for.
Well, look, we could point them both.
Yeah. We could point them both.
Well, look, you're probably completely correct, though. Hey, like in terms of that actually probably just is the answer in terms of the single pointing, which would most advantage 8-point decks would be like up 1 city, down 1 White Plume, 7-point list.
Yeah.
Don't get it, but the 8-point list do. Yeah, so I actually think I kind of was laughing to myself, thinking, is there even possibly a correct answer to this? But you found it, so
yeah.
Good on you. All right, guys. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this episode of 7 Point Cast, talking in the 8 Point gaming space. Just obviously, please subscribe to not just YouTube now. I'm now told that we are reliably on Spotify. So please subscribe to that. Lime, are we on any other services now, or is it just YouTube and Spotify?
Look, we've got the OnlyFans spinning up pretty soon, so keep your eyes peeled for the link.
Please no. But otherwise, if you want to be part of an episode of 7 Point Cast, we're always looking for people to talk to. In particular, if you've got some sort of like niche interest or brew which you've had some success with, we're interested in talking about that and really opening people's eyes to the true diversity available in the format. Thank you once again, Chris, for coming on. It was an absolute pleasure, mate. And we're looking forward to seeing everyone in the next episode.